Hi, Kevin. You're muted. I do that all the time.
Yes. I
You
didn't want
know
to.
Todd Zakrajik.
Yes, he and I are writing a book together.
I saw that. I know Todd. I met him at the first Lilly conference I ever attended,
Yeah.
and ended up taking a job for which he, I think, had applied and knew, or I think he actually decided not to apply for it. And I mean, this was like 5 years before I applied for it. But anyway, he knew the backstory on the job that I took. And so anyway, and I saw him at the Institute for New Faculty Developers last August again. And yeah, so I don't know if he'd remember me. He meets a lot of people, but he's, one of the organizers of the pod network. So
He is.
anyway, and the
Yeah.
Lilly conference. So anyway, small world. Academia is a small world.
I know.
So I don't have a ton of stuff prepared to introduce you. Do you want to give me a few notes before other people join us? And are you all okay? Are you guys ready to go? And I can make either of you the co-host if you like, or tell me what you'd like.
Maybe both, and that way we can. If I don't know if polls are enabled for this room or not, but
They are. So Kevin, I will make you the host. And then, oh, wait, I'm going to make Maria the co-host. And then I'm going to make Kevin the host. I have no control anymore.
Sounds good.
At the beginning, I'm going to ask people to put their names in the chat so that they can get flex credit. And I just plugged these sessions at the end of Lasana Hotep's talk a few minutes ago. But that was an hour and a half, so people might be like going to take a break for a minute. So yeah, I don't know, anything else you need from me? Should I just turn it over to you to introduce yourselves?
that's fine. Yeah, I don't like to stand on ceremony too much, but it's nice for people to know who we are and where we're from, and
yeah,
it's also an opportunity to talk about privilege.
Okay, you want me to do that, or you want to do that? Sorry.
Maria, do you want to just introduce ourselves?
I have like a little bit written down that might be related to like why I'm involved. Like I wrote down just, my basic qualifiers, which is I've been teaching online for 15 years, but then I talk about how I am a first generation student, first generation American, and why I gravitated toward the work, and then I'll just kind of stop there.
Okay. Sounds like you guys have it.
We do.
So how are you doing, Shannon? It's good to see you face to face. Thank you for inviting us.
It's nice to see you face to face as well. And yeah, we're so thrilled that you all are joining us. Kevin, at the end of Lasana Hotep's session, I talked about working with you on institutionalizing the equity rubric.
Yeah.
And nobody threw anything. So I think this is a community that's really eager for this work.
That's really cool. Yeah, I actually just looked at the website, Woodland Community College, and it's the one with like a lot of green on it, and it's a really cool homepage because I immediately noticed Spanish language, and there's some really prominent student services or student topics on it. So
Good.
yeah, I could see the college being receptive to like this kind of work. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a good. We have a really engaged faculty. We have an pretty much entirely new administrative team. So the president has been here for a year, and then the vice president of instruction is not quite a year, and then the vice president for student services the two deans of instruction and the dean of Lake County campus are all basically started permanent positions here in July.
Whoa.
So we're
Lot of
bringing a lot
change.
of energy and a lot of
Yay.
commitment and a lot of background
Mhm.
to the conversation. So I think it's good.
Awesome. So how did the diversity statement experience go? I think I had a faculty reach out and mentioned that you were leading a diversity statement discussion, maybe?
Oh, so the diversity committee, which is now the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee,
Mhm.
has been looking at their vision statement. There's a
Okay.
subcommittee who's doing that, and I'm not part of that.
Mhm.
I am with, let me see, I have a note about one of the sessions.
That could have been it. It was a while back.
So I've been working with the, hang on a second.
So I'm looking, I don't see the poll features, so I'm thinking we can just use the chat if we had a poll that we want to use.
That sounds good. And what I'm doing on my end is I'm just opening my Google Drive and showing my notes. Do you want to present the slideshow on your shared screen?
If that would help so you can see your notes, yeah, I can do that.
Cool. Okay.
We're good. And can I jump off just for a second?
Please, I'm the
Yeah.
host now, so you've
Go for
got.
it. Cool. Okay, yeah, I think my notes are good, and yeah, I don't want to feel like I'm just filling up space by talking. So
Mhm.
if they're really engaged faculty, I would totally want to hear how they're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. I always feel like so sneaky. And this never goes away when you're in art or art history, but it always feels like so like rebellious and like iconoclastic to like show nude figures
Oh,
in
yeah.
like a public format. Like, why doesn't that go away? Like, I'm sure. So I'm like, woo, slide number 8.
Yeah.
But you know, in Kansas, I mean, there were even some community colleges, and there are some in California, everywhere really, where you can't have live models because that's just like still kind of iffy.
Right. Well, and I
Yeah,
know some cultures where the people will want to know in advance so they
yeah,
don't look.
yeah. That was really interesting about when I would go to museums because there's always so much nudity and figurative art that when I ask students for their reflections, they sometimes based on their background, cultural background, they'd say, I just don't like it because it like totally is offensive to me personally. And it was a really interesting discussion.
Hmm.
It's like, who's to say? And have you ever heard of the Gorilla Girls?
It sounds familiar, but maybe that'll be something we'll.
Yeah, maybe I'll pull that up. The Gorilla Girls did, like, they started in the 80s and they're all anonymous, and it's all pretty well-known artists and writers, I think, and art historians, and they wear these gorilla masks and they create public art and advertising style stuff like Barbara Kruger, where
Hmm.
they'll have like a nude odalisque and they'll say, something like, why do women have to get naked and to get into a museum? And they criticize the like lack of female representation. I'll pull up an image, but I feel like they're still super relevant, and they're still active. They still come to colleges and universities and speak. They're pretty cool. I'll pull that up.
Yeah, if it fits within the context of this presentation, for sure.
Yeah, just like a quick image. Okay, I am adding it after slide 7.
Perfect. Yeah, once you, yeah, once I go into present mode, we can't make any more edits. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just an image of I believe a billboard that they did, but you don't even have to say anything. It really speaks for itself, and it always generates a lot of discussion. Okay.
And we might, yeah, I'm not muted. We might give this a few minutes just because, again, Lasana Hotep's session ended at 11. It was like leaving a little few minutes after 11:30.
Okay.
People maybe needed to take a biology break.
Yes.
Yeah, that one sounded really interesting. I read the summary of the Flex Day event.
Yeah, I would encourage, well, we could hear from the faculty and staff who are already on here, but I would say I would encourage you to bring him to Peralta. He's really inspiring to do the work and really clear about how to do it, I think. But like I said, maybe the faculty and staff folks here might chime in and see if they think that as well.
It was a really good presentation. It just touched on the surface. As I put in chat in the last one, I took a class over the summer with that one, and it was 4 weeks of that kind of stuff. And we made a liquid syllabus with, and I forget the teacher's name, Fabiola
Torres, yeah.
Thank you. And she's quite wonderful too. And I really like the way she had organized it too. But yeah, the Sana Hotep was a great speaker. I saw him in February at the California Acceleration Project, the CAP meeting in end of February, and he had spoken there, and it was really good. So, but this course, the course is Equity and Culturally Relevant Teaching and Learning. And it's pretty in-depth and pretty interesting. And you go and you make a liquid syllabus and you work on some documents. So I found that quite helpful.
Well, maybe just 1 or 2 more minutes, and then what I've noticed is that there's usually like a bump a few minutes after, or maybe people took a lunch break. Well, Kelly and I'm sorry, Kevin and Maria, would you like to get started?
You bet.
Okay. And just before you do, just a reminder to everyone here to put your name in the chat.
Please. And while you do that, I will share my screen.
Thanks everybody for coming. Just setting up my notes real quick.
Great. Maria, you let me know when you're ready and we'll get started.
I'm ready, Freddie.
Ha!
Me
All
too.
right. Well, hello, everybody. I am Kevin Kelly, and I'm here with Maria Guzman. We're going to talk a little bit about the Peralta Online Equity Rubric. But first, I thought it might be nice to know a little bit about us. I teach at San Francisco State University as one of my many hats that I wear. And I first started getting involved in equity with the Peralta team in earnest when we worked on some projects. We'll go into that in a second. But I also got into it because of my own students. And just one quick story. When I was early on in my career as an online teacher, I was struggling with students submitting their work in so many different formats. And so I asked them all to use whatever they wanted to create their essays and files, but save them as PDFs. And a student emailed me and said, hey, right now I'm living in my car. I'm taking your class called How to Learn with Your Mobile Device on my iPhone, and I have no way to create a PDF. What do I do? And it was right there that I realized that I was creating an equity-based barrier for this student to complete the work and succeed in my class. So suffice it to say, that was not the only time I came to these realizations with the help of my students, but I'm just so excited to be here with you today, and I'll hand over the baton to Maria.
Hey everyone, I'm Maria Guzman, and I am a faculty trainer with the online equity team. I'm also an instructor at College of Alameda, Berkeley City College, and I sometimes teach at City College of San Francisco. The main area of study that I cover is art history, but I also teach painting online. My experience is that I've been teaching online for about 12 years, and total teaching about 15, a little bit over 15 years. And I've been working with the online equity team for a year, and it's informed my practice of editing my courses based on patterns that I see with student challenges. And so my background is very much a reason that I've gravitated to this work. I'm a first-generation college student and first-generation high school graduate. So education was very much a high priority for my generation and my family. And so it's something that I'm very proud of, but at the same time, it was a lot of self-taught experience and trial and error. And so part of what I like about this work is that it kind of cuts out that trial and error and feeling kind of like you don't know what you're doing in an educational setting. And so it's added some meaning to my work in a new way.
Great. Well, we thought we'd start with a little overview of the initiative overall. But I think the key takeaways are that it started as some work that one of our team members, Inger Stark, did during her sabbatical, looking at statistics around student success in online courses. When I came on board, I was helping Peralta convert from Moodle to Canvas and running different workshops. And as I did that and followed a lot of the online education initiatives rubric to support the faculty members who are building their courses anew, at that time, the Distance Education Committee wanted to create its first ever distance education plan. And as part of that process, they decided that equity should be one of the core values. And as we were moving through the process of building this plan, we decided that we couldn't just have it be a digital piece of paper on a shelf, that it was nice that we talked about equity in the plan. We wanted to actually make it happen. So we searched the world over for some sort of tool that would help faculty members infuse equity strategies in their courses, and we couldn't find any. So we ended up doing a lot of research and building the rubric ourselves. And so I've got the links to the rubric and the description of the rubric criteria that I've just pasted in the chat. They're also here on this slide, and we'll make sure we get these slides to you as well. But you know, as the slide says in the bottom left corner, those were the goals for Peralta, and we're still fine-tuning the whole experience for faculty members, and as well as the operational definition of what equity means. I love the fact that, you know, Webster's dictionary, or maybe it's Merriam-Webster, I forget which one, but the definition of equity is very simple: freedom from bias. And the Peralta Distance Education team has expanded that definition to mean freedom from biases, assumptions, and institutional barriers that negatively impact students' motivation, student opportunities, and student achievement. And so as we go through this presentation and this workshop, and Maria guides you through some different activities, we want to keep that in mind, that we're really focused on that. But your group at Woodland College may come up with its own goals, its own definition of equity, and how you use the rubric. The rubric is a Creative Commons document, so you're welcome to modify it as you see fit. And we actually have version 3 coming out in the next week or so, so stay tuned. But we are excited to bring it to you today, and we'll also be talking about it in the context of a specific course, Maria's art history course. So I mentioned before that we did some research, but it's every criterion in the rubric is based on some sort of research that either shows something that creates an achievement gap, or what we call an educational debt gap, if you're familiar with that concept. It's not necessarily a deficit-based thinking. It's not a student challenge. We need to make our colleges student ready rather than our students college ready. And so the research found different things that students would find difficult in online courses based on equity issues. And sometimes we also found research that showed things that would help students succeed. And so we built this rubric again to be used in conjunction with the OEI rubric, the Online Education Initiative out of the Chancellor's Office. So you'll see when you actually get a chance to see the rubric, they start with the letter E. And that's because the OEI rubric has sections A through D, and E for equity, where we like to call ourselves the next set of resources. So we wanted to maybe kick off with an activity, real brief. Thinking about your own syllabus, or what you think is important for your students and their educational experience. What connections can you make to your campus? We know that there may be some staff members here, some student services staff, as well as faculty. And so making sure that we're drawing connections, especially in today's world where most learning is virtual. If you've been following any student surveys, students have been sharing that they're having a hard time finding the right people to contact, where do I go for help. And so we put these 2 links on the slide, and I think it's just wcc.yccd.edu and then /student. But we'd love for you to take a quick look at your own campus homepage or the student services page and see if there's anything on there that you feel has some connection to equity and something that you would want to share with your own students in your course. So I'm going to zip my lip while you all take a quick tour of your own campus website or the student services page. And then if you have any questions or if you have any ideas about something that you hadn't considered and you think you might add to your syllabus, pop it in the chat.
Yeah, so I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but one of the biggest outcomes that I've seen through my work is that I feel like I'm going beyond just sharing the student services in like the announcements or a message. Like now if a student has an issue with accessing the resources, I actually can walk them through it, and I can use language, and I can, you know, assure them that it's correct language. And that's something that I feel pretty good about. And it was kind of an unexpected thing that happened over the course of my work.
And if you are a student services staff member, maybe in the chat you can highlight some of the things that you consider to be equity challenges that you face. Absolutely, Maria. That idea that multilingual websites makes it inviting and reduces barriers for different groups.
And that never gets old. I feel like every time I go to Fruitvale here in Oakland or walk around the Mission in San Francisco or any Spanish-speaking community, I always feel like it's this renewed sense of connection, and it's really effortless. So it's a really great gesture, and it goes a long way.
And Noelle brings up a good point, not something that she found, but something she couldn't find, how students can drop a class. And so we definitely do need to help our students make those administrative tasks easier. And so that might be something that is worth researching, connecting with someone on campus to find out where that page is so the students don't have to do that search themselves. In some cases, it could take more than 4 clicks to find, and students may not keep going. And I know Maria might bring this up as she goes through her concrete examples, but some of the things that we include in our syllabus are also worth including in the instructions for assignments and activities so that students don't have to refer back to the syllabus. I call it just-in-time help. Shannon, I'm surprised that I don't see our Bienvenida recording displayed prominently either on the home page or the student services page.
So there's a recording that expresses a sense of welcoming. That's pretty cool.
Especially when we talk about things like belonging.
Mhm.
Great. Maybe we'll wait for one more minute for those folks who are still typing, and we'll move on to the next slide, but obviously you can still put your ideas in the chat.
Absolutely.
So as we get ready to make the transition from a little bit of information about us and the rubric itself, we wanted to make sure you knew a little bit about the criteria. And so earlier I included the link to the rubric. And so wanted to briefly just jump through the criteria. And again, that other document that I linked to provides a pretty good explanation of each one. But right now, especially, we've seen that some equity issues have been amplified due to campus closures, due to the COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in. And so when we talk about technology as an equity challenge, it could mean anything from access to technology. We know at least a quarter of students around the country don't have adequate access to reliable internet connections, even in urban areas, never mind rural areas. But it can also mean that students might be sharing a device with family members as they have stay-at-home orders, and they are maybe having to use their mobile device for things that aren't so easy. Like I shared in my intro, that student who was living in his car and had to try to figure out how to write essays. Ultimately, I told him he could use Google Docs, or now I'm doing a strategy where I've created a Google Voice account, and students can write their essays on pen and paper and then record it as a voicemail message, and I can I can grade the essay with the same rubric, even if it's a recording. Student resources and support. Obviously, again, we know that there are some of our colleagues from the student services teams on your campus, and so we need to make those connections clear for students, what resources will help them as they go through their different educational endeavors. And it might include things like mental health support, because right now students are feeling a lot of stress and anxiety, even if it's not related to school, but it's going to impact their ability to study. But also resources like librarians, resources like tutors, resources like financial aid, things that are part of your course experience and things that are outside your course experience. We have to help students find those. If you're not familiar with Universal Design for Learning, it's a set of principles really framed on providing multiple pathways for students to succeed in online courses, as well as face-to-face courses and hybrid courses and everything in between. Diversity and inclusion are core concepts for our equity criteria. Images and representation involve helping students see themselves in the media we use in our coursework, whether that be a part of a textbook or a presentation we create or anything else, and also dispelling stereotypes, making sure that students are adequately represented and accurately represented. How do we manage biases that we bring to the table ourselves and that students may have as well? And so it's framing it as managing these biases that exist, whether they be implicit biases or interaction biases or anything that we know to be true. How do we help students find meaning in the content that we bring for students to review before meeting the learning outcomes? And then how do we foster a sense of connection and belonging? So those are the 8 criteria in the rubric that Maria is going to take us through in the context of her course. But last but not least, I just want to share some data that helps make this a little bit more real. If you see those dotted and dashed lines, those are the averages at Peralta Community College District for student success. The top one is student success in face-to-face classes, and the lower one, the dashes, are the student success in online courses, meaning they have completed and passed the course. And so often we only look at those numbers for whether or not our students are succeeding. But when you disaggregate that average by different demographics, here it's by ethnicity, but it could also be by first generation. As Maria brought up earlier, it could be by students with disabilities. It could be any number of demographics, but here you can see that some students are not succeeding at the same rates as others. And so these can be characterized as equity-based gaps that we need to address. And now I'm going to hand it over to Maria to talk about how.
Cool. So I thought it would be helpful before I give you my take on how it's translated to my art history class in specific, might be helpful to look at the rubric and just kind of review the categories and get a sense of like the language and how we're measuring how this looks in a course. So Kevin, would you like to share the rubric or do you want me to share my screen?
I can share the rubric, yes.
Okay, cool. So it's something that I was acquainted with at the beginning of my work as a faculty trainer. So it was a gradual understanding through a lot of group discussions. So we had faculty from various disciplines talking about examples that we could apply this rubric to, and examples of, you know, what is the problem, and you know, this category, which category are we looking at, and what is this solution? So just wanted to give you a sense of the language and how I'll be talking about some of my examples. And I see it as kind of like layers. So we start with E1, which is technology, and we go all the way through E8, which is more personal work. It's a sense of belonging and connection, right? So we start at that kind of initial layer of just having access and knowing what to use and when to use it, and you know, having that, you know, fluency. Some people call it digital fluency. So let's look at that category and just get a sense of what that actually looks like. Great. So E1 technology. We have 3 categories: incomplete, aligned, and then exemplary. So we just consider aligned a lot in our discussions, and exemplary is awesome, but we just want to get to aligned. And aligned is all technology required for the course is listed and described in the syllabus. So that's part of why I asked you to bring your syllabus, is just to get a look at where your syllabus is at right now and how you can add really helpful, meaningful tech info right off the bat. A lot of times the syllabus is the first point of contact with students, and you know, especially if you like to share the syllabus before the course opens, it can be a really great way to help them get some of those important questions answered. And so I like that category in discussing a lot of the work. And so when we go into student support and resources, as Kevin's mentioned, right now we have this heightened sense of these acute and unique needs that are in addition to the needs that we've seen with our students. And so understanding like the nuance of how student services work, and also getting students to ask for help is really important. Being able to communicate across technology and to connect with students is really important. I was sharing with the group yesterday about a moment that I had with a student during our Zoom office hours. And she shared with me something that seemed not student services oriented, but after discussion, I realized that, you know, she might want to check out one of the services. And we noted some hesitation, and we kind of talked through that hesitation. And so it was really, really great for me, because I'm also living through this time, and I'm also kind of experiencing some of these things, like motivation. It's really hard. So I tried to just share how I was dealing with it and how I was managing my time with my student. And we talked about the service, and it was awesome. And we talked about one good thing we were going to do for ourselves that day. And it was a really great note to end on for the office hour. So that's a great E2 strategy or story or scenario. E3 is actually the one I've gotten most engaged with. recently. It's about making the course easy to navigate and making the assignments a little bit more easy to understand. And if they're not easy to understand, having student feedback and rolling with it and making adjustments and adding other modes of expression and other ways to communicate the objectives. And as Kevin mentioned, other ways that they can complete the assignment. You don't want to feel like you're cutting students off from succeeding because they don't want to use a certain outlet or a certain mode of communication. So it's flexibility up front instead of later after the assignment's completed and you realize that that was the issue. So communication is really important. And so as you can see in the rest of the categories, it gets a little deeper. It gets into diversity and inclusion, which I'm going to talk about in my examples. Images and representation. So the impact of images and representation in art history is a real topic. And if anyone has looked at like revisionist art history or other methodologies like feminism and Marxism and all that great stuff, you know, your heart's immediately going to respond to this category. And it's been really fun to reinterpret my course through this rubric and to know that, you know, these inclinations and these feelings that I had as like an upcoming undergrad POC student and graduate student, it's so great to see it reflected here, you know, and I feel really good sharing it with my students. And so moving on, we've got human bias, and that is another really interesting category to go over. We'll go over that also. And finally, you have content meaning, which is just kind of like presenting information that students can relate to, whether it's their personal experiences, their academic interests, or their future academic goals. All of that can be woven into course design. So that's been really fun. One example that I'm contemplating is sharing a meditation app with my students during an office hour. I'm going to take a poll and ask if they're even slightly interested in like a 3-minute meditation before we start the office hour and get into course stuff. And if they're not into it, I'll just share my app in an announcement, you know, and whoever finds use for it, that's great. So connection and belonging is also something that we're going to cover in one or two of the examples, and it's something that goes both ways. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to start with an example of how I select my content. So let's go to that slide. And so this is the images and art history slide. So one of the overarching themes in my studies and in my course design has always been first impressions versus lasting impressions. So I try to encourage my students to move away from depending on other sources to speak for them, because that is like such a metaphor for how we move in the world, right? So I want students to get a sense of their own feelings, their own associations, and then to craft opinions around that, and, you know, to pursue research based on that maybe. So that's how I present my assignments, and I always encourage my students, you know, after you introduce the artwork, I want your first impressions. I don't want it Googled. I don't want a quote from anybody. I just want your impressions. And so this is my way of saying to them, whatever you think is important, whatever you think is justified, and it will develop over time. You know, you don't have to be perfect right off the bat. And it also encourages a sense of variety and inclusion, and inviting them to share what they think, no matter how simple or off the top of their head it is. That's a really good tone. So the topics that I cover can sometimes pass on this implied preference or model. What's understood in art history as the canon, which we probably, if we've taught it or taken it, you've heard that word. So I consider incorporating both art and institutional critique strategies for my course design. So not only do I talk about first impressions, I also talk about lasting impressions, like art history traditions and conventions, the canon. Who does it value, who does it elevate, and who is left out of that dialogue? how can we update that in the 21st century? So the next bullet point is a question for you as faculty. Is there a historical lack of diversity in your area of study, and how can an assignment address this example? So doesn't have to be a big one, can be a small one. And if you have any questions for clarification, make sure to put them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer. Oh, and bonus pop quiz. Who is this artist and what is this painting?
We have our first entry in the pop quiz. You're on mute.
So yes, absolutely. This image is like so well known, so commonplace. It's just a part of our, you know, westernized art history vernacular. You don't have to be an art history major to know who this is. It's been built up over and over, and it's been passed on for years and years and years, and through courses and courses and courses. So yes, you're absolutely correct, Noel. It is the Odalisque by Edouard Manet, who's a great artist. I love him. So far, I don't really see any comments about diversity. Oh, I do see one. Okay. So Shannon is sharing that she thought about her area of study and it having not much or no diversity, 18th century British literature. But when she started digging, she found that there are many ways of engaging diversity. Would you mind sharing one, Shannon?
So there were a couple of things that I found. One was I found that there were people ahead of me who had thought of this and had published anthologies. So one's called Caribbeana, and it's readings from the Caribbean in the 18th century, and it's all people of color. And then there's also this one, Unchained Voices, anthology of Black authors in the English-speaking world of the 18th century. So that was great. And there was also the work that a lot of scholars had done before me about finding women writers in this time period. And in fact, there was actually a working class poets movement in the later 18th century. But there were also other ways of engaging diversity, like the term noble savage first appears in a play by John Dryden in the late 17th century. And so the author doesn't necessarily have to be representative, but can sort of bring to our attention those conversations, I think, sometimes, and sort of trace back it's the history of ideas.
Yeah.
I think. Anyway, so
that's really similar to what I try to do in art history, because they're very much the same tropes being used in art history. The noble savage is a big thing, and so I try to include Indigenous and Native American art, and I let students take the reins on that, actually, and I encourage them to find as many artists that would self-identify in that way, and I encourage respectful use of language. So I want them to use the language that the artist would use about their work and about themselves. And so that to me is a strategy that puts an end to that naming other people's experiences and naming other people's identities. And I think that's actually a lot of what's harmful about accepting certain literature as canonical. So I think that's a really great strategy. Thanks for sharing that.
I put the books in the chat in case anybody wants to look at them. They're both amazing.
Awesome. So. Yeah. And I found there's some really great Facebook groups that talk about decolonizing and specific disciplines. There's a decolonizing art history group, and they've shared a lot of resources. So that's kind of how I stay current and I stay active in my course design. But it is something that I've thought to myself a lot. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you an example of how this still messes with my head as an instructor.
And before we do that, do you want to take a look at what Christopher had to say in the chat as well?
Oh, I think I missed that. Okay. Okay. In his discipline, there's a focused thread of intercultural communication. So standpoint theory and audience analysis are key elements that are woven through all communication courses. However, the public speaking examples offered by publishers are often not diverse. Okay. I often have to bring in various other speaker examples that bring in diversity. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. How one area can be very diverse in theory, and then in the actual application of more individual identities, it lacks that diversity.
It defaults very much so. And so really trying to bring in cultural different perspectives in terms of bringing the examples for students, just showing that there's a wide range of different ways in which to inform, to persuade, to entertain, whatever it may be. There's different examples of doing that it isn't just here's the status quo. And so I have to proactively try to seek those examples and throw them in lieu of just sometimes the standard examples that are given.
Wow, okay, yeah. I try to bring in, contemporary events also. Like right tonight, there's actually a really great lecture about the Frida Kahlo exhibition. I believe, is it the De Young? So they're talking about the curatorial approach. And so I'm really intrigued to see how they approach this content, because she's such a her work is such a site of the same tropes over and over. And there's so much that's available to think about when it comes to her work. So I'm actually going to share it with students and see what they get out of it. But I really encourage that practice. And I get a lot out of it too. It keeps me current, and it keeps me rethinking how I think of what is an artist, what is a great curator, what's a great exhibition. So Christopher, have you also looked into open education resources?
Absolutely. And so I've got a really great community of other communication studies. We work really well as a network. And so we're constantly sharing resources, ideas. And if someone finds a really great example of something, we quickly share it on kind of a joint community practice. And so I've been able to really been fortunate to tap into a lot of different examples, at least for examples. I mean, the textbooks I pick, I really try to find textbooks that are really sensitive to diversity, talking about obviously culture, but also sexual orientations, LGBTQ orientations, those kind of things, really try and bring that in as examples to perpetuate through. But it's been interesting is that in terms of the course itself, finding those examples that are diverse, not just talking about in theory, but application. It's been interesting to bring in. I've been pretty close to finding stuff though.
Cool, thank you for sharing. Well, the reason I asked that is because before I got involved with this initiative, I was deeply dedicated to OER, and I still am. I support it. And I consider our group work to be very similar to OER in principle, as far as creating materials that are needed and working with the group and sharing them very equally, so that we don't have to dig for a long time or go out of our own campus for this really important work. And so I think it encourages kind of this local open education approach. So I'm really glad to hear that you're practicing that. That's awesome. Okay, on to the next slide, which is the sauciest slide I just added. So this is the Guerrilla Girls, and I share them with students every once in a while to get them thinking about the hard reality and the data that backs up implicit biases and asymmetrical relationships in art and art history. And while the Guerrilla Girls do focus on gendered biases, and their definition of gender has been expanded to be updated in a 21st century way, they're still active. This is just a great example because I doubt that the numbers have changed that much since the 80s and 90s when they were doing a lot of this kind of work. And so I share it with students to get them thinking, there's a lot in an institution that happens before those images become available to you. And there's a lot of decisions and preferences that frame the exhibitions. And so which exhibitions do you want to create? You know, I have an assignment where I ask them to curate an exhibition and to create an exhibition philosophy based on these kinds of questions and topics. That's another really fun way to get students engaged. And there's a really cool open education resource called Art Steps, which allows you to create art exhibitions online. So I'll put that in the chat. Oh, nice. Oh, that's cool. I like that. Okay, I'm gonna have to add that to my list of resources for them. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of great conversations going on right now, just in general, when it comes to like POC representation and respectful repatriation. Although I did hear something kind of weird about the British Museum not wanting to repatriate. Anyway, yeah, I share these with students and I give them alternative views and alternative approaches, and I show them that progress is being made. And so they can be a part of that progress. They can be a future awesome curator, an awesome arts writer, an awesome artist. You know, I give them that sense of being included through the assignments, hopefully. So if we look at the next slide, this is just a quick example. We all recognize Manet as the painter of the Odalisque, but who are these artists? Just off the top of your head, 2 seconds, does anybody know? Yes or no? Yeah, so it's very common. These artists are painting the same topics, same subject matter, but they're much less represented in art history. And so I share artists like Mickalene Thomas on the left, and Sylvia Slay, who was a pretty well-known feminist artist in the 70s and 80s, on the right. And I have students have like a more well-rounded discussion of subject matter and various approaches and cultural context. So cultural context is really big for me. And so what I try to engage through these kinds of exercises is content meaning. So that's category E7. I like to take time that to explain like why artwork is meaningful to me and how it might be meaningful to them in a different way. And so I definitely established that not everybody is going to respond to things in the same way, and that's fine. And I encourage them to make personal connections to artwork or associations that make sense to them. So this is something that I try to do in every weekly discussion where a lot of the meaningful content is. So uninformed representation can alienate students as much as negative imagery. And so that's something I keep in mind. I also discuss things like problematic nature of artwork. I talk about how conflicted I feel showing Gauguin's work because of his lack of cultural context and respect for the people of like the culture that he painted so often. And we listen to podcasts and we talk it out. So on to the next slide for another example. So E6 it's actually one of the categories that are the ones that it gets wrestled with the most probably. So a lot of faculty are like, well, I don't know how to incorporate this into my class. Give me some examples. Can we talk through this? So there's a wide variety of biases that we practice unconsciously as faculty. So I gave you some examples on the left-hand side. It can be everything from people submitting work later in the week to professional tone in writing or appearance. And yeah, it can be very like unintentional. And so when we feel those things or make those judgments, I take a moment to write them down and think about where they show up and how I can check that through language or a grading rubric, for example. And so understanding that like the language in art can be impactful is great, but I need to understand how my language and my grading is also impactful. And so this is the category that I really read up on when I need to be mindful of that. So I establish a lot of possibilities for expression, a lot of images, but also a lot of ways of looking at how they do the work and getting to know them as students and, you know, learning what they're progressing in. It's a very student by student approach. So let me go ahead and share something. Actually, Kevin brought it to my attention. 94% of instructors call on students in online discussions whose names appear to be white males. Am I repeating that data correctly, Kevin?
Yeah, the study out of Stanford back in 2018 found that the instructors who took part in the study responded first and sometimes only to names that appeared to be white male names. And so just it's a type of bias that they call human interaction bias. And there are a variety of strategies we can use to manage that.
Yeah, so I was pretty surprised when I heard that. And so we discuss things like that in our group, and we come up with individualized strategies. I know Kevin uses flashcards or index cards to track his meaningful contact with students. And he makes sure to be very equitable in reaching every student at least once in every course. And I really admire that. And I'm more of a spreadsheet gal, so I have an Excel spreadsheet and I measure that. And it helps me to feel like I'm being very equitable towards my students and hearing them. And yeah, so that's really, this is a really great category for me to think about. So
Yeah, and I'll give a shout out for spreadsheets as well. I use a Google spreadsheet to track how many times I interact with each student, because I have 50 students in my online classes, and so I can't reply to every student every discussion, but I let them know in my syllabus that I plan on giving each student the same amount of feedback throughout the semester, and that flashcard or index card strategies for face-to-face environments, where you put all the students on separate index card, and when you want to call students to answer a question, you just take the top card off the stack, and that way each student gets to answer an equal number of times throughout the semester.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it looks like Gina's got some ideas in the chat as well.
Let's see. Okay, so she's mentioning that her husband experiences this at Davis. He always gets called on, Logan Jones, and the students with Chinese names hardly ever get called on. Wow. There you go. Yeah, when I saw the percentage, I thought it was extremely high, and I wanted to believe that it wasn't kind of a problem, I guess, to that degree. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Gina. It's hard to observe things like that. Christopher sharing, we also need to be mindful for comfort, publicly participation in a course, and we need to find alternative ways for engagement and assessment. Absolutely, that's a E3 topic, and it's culturally respectful too. Some students don't feel comfortable speaking directly to an instructor in front of a group or leading a discussion, for example. So we have to respect that and find other ways for them to express themselves and to feel included in the group. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, oh my gosh, I could teach a whole workshop about Zoom etiquette. I'm all about turning off the video and encouraging my students to do that. I also get 100% consent from students before I record an office hour. I like to record them just in case students can't make it to the office hour, and then they can watch it later. So that's another way that I encourage a sense of like feeling connected for students. But yes, I try to be as respectful as possible for students' boundaries and preferences. It's a really great point, and that is totally related to human biases. Just because I'm comfortable with something does not mean that all of my students are. And that includes everything from the language I use in an assignment and yeah, Zoom etiquette for sure. So if we go to the next slide. This is just an example of how these various 8 categories can apply to one experience around an assignment. So the assignment is a discussion thread, and I'll give you about like 5 minutes or so to think of an assignment with the bullet points that are listed. So you can base it off of an SLO from your syllabus if you want. You can work together based on one person's syllabus, or you can work independently if you'd like. It's going to be a discussion thread assignment, and technology will be used in order to conduct online research, so you can use your online library. Students are asked to develop an idea and share it with the class, and audio, video, or written submissions are accepted, so students get a choice. And things to keep in mind are ease of use for students and instructions, making sure they're clear and that you know what your outcome is. So I'll set a timer for about a little bit under 5 minutes. What do you think, Kevin?
Sure, 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're good on time. Okay. And it does not have to be the perfect assignment, just a rough idea of how you would design something like this.
And do you want me to put people in breakout rooms or?
That sounds like a good idea. Can you do breakout rooms?
I can.
Okay.
So everybody, you're going to get a chance to discuss this. We will paste these instructions because you'll lose the ability to see them. We'll paste them. We'll send it as a message to everybody in the chat, in the breakout rooms.
Thank you, Kevin.
Groups of 3, think?
That sounds good. Yeah, we have about 16 people.
Maria, I take it that it's time to bring people back.
Yes, I figured we had chatted quite a bit about discussion threads, and my timer went off. We went like a minute over, so I was nervous that we were going to miss joining everyone back up.
Yeah, well, you had the timer, so was watching for when you left your room.
I know, and then I didn't know how to message you, so okay,
No
tech,
worries.
man, tech. Okay, so
Just need a couple more people and they'll all be joining us in just a second.
awesome. I definitely got a sense of how discussion threads can look so different for everybody.
Yes. Shall I share my screen again, or do you want to wait?
I think let's share the screen because it has some of the reflection questions. Okay, I just want to hear about what everyone came up with, and then we'll share that next slide.
Well, we didn't quite get a full activity planned out, but we were talking about having the different mediums being something that's, I think, really helpful for the students. And so we were thinking like a discussion post that would ask, something related to the course where they could either put an audio or video or written submission. And that's making me reflect, because this semester I've been trying to say, no, you have to submit a video because it's a language class, but I'm noticing a lot of students just aren't submitting the video even when that's the requirement. They're just typing, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to maybe rethink how I'm structuring these discussion posts, because they're not quite going in the way that I had hoped. And I think, at the beginning, probably challenging for students to want to record a video or to know how. So anyways, those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I've run into that same challenge, Jessica, and I'm not sure if it's maybe a combination of how adept they are at creating the videos, but willingness to share the videos. The same way Maria said, it's perfectly okay to turn your camera off in a Zoom session. Students may not want to see their own image. We know some people may be facing challenges related to self, and then the technology, whether or not they have the appropriate technology to reach the goals. So providing multiple pathways is E3, Universal Design for Learning. And the group I was in with Chris and Noel, and I think it was Todd, all came up with some ideas for that. Do any of you want to share how you address some of those challenges?
I think we talked about methodology also, how they would deliver that. And one of the things was that since I'm an English teacher, I like to see a lot in writing, where, because the more you can practice that with parameters and things like that, and maybe even with samples, I think is quite helpful.
Yeah, one of the things that came up when I was listening to Gina and, do I pronounce that Neely? Neely?
Yeah, it's Neely.
Neely, okay. I definitely heard the same concern, is that some students aren't completing certain aspects of an assignment in a discussion like video, and that tech is still kind of this thing that you're either excited about it or you're not. And how do we assess that? How do we assess what's keeping students from doing things in a course? And I've been thinking a lot about this because I see the same thing, and I'm going to have students be co-authors and critics, because sometimes they kind of have fun with that. And we're just going to talk about Canvas Studio, and we're going to practice making a video. And they're going to share their impressions and whether they like using it or not, and they get credit no matter what. whether they create one or not, but I just want like an assessment, and I will definitely learn from that, but it still is kind of a topic to discuss when designing these things. And Gina also shared that sometimes there's not a lot of time to discuss these things. And so I think short and sweet is always great for discussion threads, but yes, especially when you don't have time to reflect and really think about how this discussion thread fits into your overall learning outcomes in your course, that can be another challenge. Does anyone feel that also?
Time for sure. I was lucky enough to moderate a student panel of California community college students up and down the state. And we had a range of students, including a single mom of 2 who works full time. And so she said, I have to accept that on some things like discussion threads, I will minimally participate. I won't be able to do everything that everybody else can, because it's just the amount of time it takes for me to engage. And sometimes she has limited windows for engagement. So she's willing to sacrifice a full A+ grade, knowing that she has other priorities in her life right now and has to balance it all.
Kevin, also, I think about just how we schedule our discussions in the class. Some people don't have time during the week because they're, helping their own children taking online classes. So they don't have like maybe an hour or 2 on the weekends. So do we have a Friday or a Sunday midnight due date for some of these things? And that can make a big impact on participation. And also in terms of how much weight you put for, grading the rubric, like being on time. Is it a small weight? Therefore students feel, okay, I can still get a lot of my points, even if it's a couple days late. I'm not going to be deemed that hard, or at least I'm participating. So I think some of that really can help encourage participation.
Absolutely. And I would just want to say something about late penalties. That's something that we've inherited from our instructors that taught us. And that's something that I've slowly over time let go of in my courses, because it just doesn't work to take a few points off for me. I don't feel good about it right now because it's so hard for students to be taking classes right now. So I've kind of put a hold on that. I've made my quizzes available until the last day of the class in hopes of encouraging students to, not feel defeated if they miss a deadline. So I think those are really great questions to ask. And I think that you decide how it's going to look in your course, because this rubric not only should apply to the courses, but you should feel like you have these choices and you should feel like it's meaningful to you, right? And I think it's really cool when you redesign your course and let go of some of those instilled traditions that are nowhere in curriculum and are nowhere in like regulated literature. It's just things that we do and we don't know why. Yeah, I love that. Melissa offers a due date but does not close the window. Same. Yeah, I encourage them to stay on a weekly routine, but it's not going to be the end of the world if they have a bad week. Okay, so let's make believe that like we came up with like the most amazing discussion thread. We thought about every single student need. We thought about every single mode of expression. We included all the technology links so that students would know how to make a Canvas video and everything. We took care of every detail because we looked through the rubric or we just reflected. Now, go on to the next slide. And here's a reality that happens, I got a feedback from a student on a discussion thread that I worked so hard on and I was so proud of. And I thought it was really inclusive. I thought it was engaging. I thought it was direct and easy to fulfill. And she replied by saying, I don't understand these instructions. I don't feel like I'm set up for success. And it hurt my feelings so much. I had to take a moment to really take that message in. And I was surprised because I worked really hard on it. And I tried to anticipate some of these things by providing as much support on the front end. And I still, I guess, did not reach that student, right? And what I didn't know until I spoke to her about 2 days later is that she was coming back from like a 9-year break from taking classes. So there was that going on. And she is more of an audio visual learner. And so by seeing her feedback in the general questions thread, I immediately responded by trying to add another mode of expression. I was giving them choices, but I wasn't giving myself a choice. So I added an audio recording that broke down the instructions and the expectations a little bit more. And it was great. She responded, it made sense. And then we talked later during an office hour, and it was an extension of that problem solving. And I thanked her for, you know, speaking up and letting me know it was frustrating, and for working with me to edit the assignment. So I let her know that she was helpful to its creation, which is absolutely true. So does anyone want to volunteer which of the rubric categories apply to this? We'll just kind of go through this and see what comes to mind based on the rubric. Feel free to open it in a tab and take a look at it.
And you can either say it out loud or pop it in the chat.
I haven't got the rubric memorized yet. I know you guys do because you've worked with a lot, so I'm wondering if we can just.
Oh, I can have the link for the PDF so that you can take a look at it again. Here we go. And this is the direct PDF to the actual rubric. Yeah, just any category that you think that this whole scenario addresses. Everything from me describing the discussion to the student responding and me adding an audio element. And even adding the office hour discussion afterwards, like all of that is around just one assignment and in the course of 1 week. And that's kind of how I'm thinking about this example, because we do a lot of that. We do a lot of bookending. We do planning, we do assessment, we do follow-up. It's very much how teaching looks to me. And it sounds like that's how it looks to other faculty. I did a fancy transition on the bullet points. Let's share the first one. I think the first one's pretty, yeah, it won't give anything away. So those are the two that immediately came to mind for me. But does anything else stand out about this scenario and the work around this assignment?
And just for the benefit of those people who aren't as familiar with the rubric, E1 is the technology criterion. So the fact that students were asked to use technology for the research component and could use different technologies to submit their work, make it a more equitable activity. And E2 is the student services and resources. And so the act of asking students to do research creates possibilities for them to interact with library faculty or the technology help desk staff, making sure, as Maria mentioned, that you provide tutorials for them to reach the goals in case they don't know how to create those Canvas videos. So a lot of great aspects. I totally agree that those two criteria are met with this activity. Should we share a couple others?
I think the next one actually, yeah, that one makes sense. So I consider this something that relates to section E3, which is universal design. And according to the rubric, it breaks it down really well. It just says that it's about multiple means of representation, action, and expression, or engagement. And so in this sense, I wasn't engaging the student quite as effectively as I'd hoped. And so I added another way to express myself. And it also helped the student to understand that, like, yeah, you can express yourself and affect how an assignment makes sense to you, which I think goes a long way. And so there are some other areas that I think relate to this scenario. One of the ways that I try to include students all the time is I want them to feel like they can analyze my assignments, not just the content. So in this sense, she's feeling hopefully more included and welcome as a member of the group. And E4 diversity and inclusion specifically talks about students' diversity being valued, and at least 3 course activities requiring students to analyze course content. So it's in the spirit of E4. And I also see E7 and E8 and E4. So E4 is mentioned. But how would E7 and E8 relate to this whole scenario and how we manage this together, both as student and instructor? Does anyone have any thoughts on that, or how they might be able to incorporate it into their approach for a current challenge?
And again, for people who aren't looking at the rubric, E7 is how do we help students find meaning in the content that we're sharing with them or activity. And E8 is fostering a sense of connection with other students and the instructor and a sense of belonging in the class itself. And then E4 is diversity and inclusion.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So I have a comment from Melissa, and it says, seems like you need to assign 2 assignments weekly to meet those sometimes. Now, is that kind of expressing, that an assignment, like a discussion thread, should aim to meet all 8 categories? Because that's a really good point of clarification. Yeah, I think that sometimes several categories can apply to the way that we teach, and that can apply to a specific assignment. But it can also apply to things like office hours and how we manage them, how we communicate them, how we share them with students. So yeah, I want to definitely encourage you to not feel as if your assignments have to meet like a bunch of these at once. In some cases, I design my assignments with just one in mind. And the nice bonus is that this rubric, the way that we designed it, we say high impact, is a lot of times because of the way that the principles of the rubric are designed through a lot of discussion and editing. They also relate to other areas just because, just kind of naturally. So I actually designed this thread with I think I had like E1 and E2 in mind. And then as the week unfolded, I found that other categories could be considered in the progression of the discussion, because my discussions are about a week long. So I'm considering it within the span of the discussion, if that makes any sense. Yes, definitely something I thought about when I started as an equity trainer, like how am I going to get all of these met in a course? But you'd be surprised how easily they overlap. They're very related. Does anyone else have any impressions about like, clarification on a category and how better to understand it? Okay. All right, well, let's go on to the next slide. So when we started, we asked what your goals were as faculty and as an institution. So something that can help you to get started on getting a better sense of this rubric is to just start simple and start with your most essential document, which is your syllabus. Ask yourself these questions and reflect. We had thought about doing a Zoom poll, but perhaps we can share something out later and get some thoughts or feedback. And of course, you can reach out to us and share feedback also and questions. So if we go to the next slide, just want to leave you with something that I think is kind of a personal, motivational idea, concept when I'm thinking about the rubric and why I do this work. I like to think of it as helping me to put myself in my students' shoes and to remember the value of being recognized for my work and for the dynamic nature of success. So a lot of times just acknowledging students and helping them to develop stronger work is super impactful, and it goes a long way. It gives them a strong sense of confidence and belonging in the institution and in their area of study. And especially for areas where there's a pronounced lack of diversity, and that's still something that's in progress, it can be really important to encourage as many students as possible to contribute to that kind of dialogue. Next slide, please. So if you want to reach out to me, I absolutely welcome it. I am really excited to be meeting faculty across the state and the area. And I'd love to tell you more about what the online equity training looks like. It's a short-term course. It's 5 weeks. It's asynchronous, and we try to be as flexible as possible in order for faculty to make this rubric their own. So I absolutely welcome you to connect with me via LinkedIn or just shoot me an email. And I think that's our last slide. Oh, further reading. If you're a resource nerd like me, there are a couple of notes that I added in the comments. We're going to share that slideshow. These are some of the inspirations for how I was thinking about this workshop and just overall what some of my inspirations are in the work. So you're more than welcome to share your thoughts on those too. Thanks for listening to us. It was great to meet everybody. And Kevin, would you like to share anything?
Only that, yeah, we've just been putting the final touches on version 3 of the rubric, but we know that the version 2 is amazing as well. And so as you get started, please feel free to contact anybody on the team. There's contact information at the bottom of the rubric, I believe. And Maria shared hers as well. But I also understand that we're coming to the end of the time. And so Shannon, feel free to let us know if there are any logistics information you want to share with all the participants, and I can even make you the host again.
Okay, thank you. I have to apologize for stepping out. I had an irate parent on the phone, and believe it or not, those are best addressed quickly.
Yeah, so sorry.
That's a regular thing. So I missed part of the conversation, and I apologize for that. Did you all mention that we will be doing the 5-week training here on campus this spring, or I mean this fall semester?
Not yet.
No.
So Betsy, the wonderful, inestimable Betsy, is arranging for some folks to come in and do, well, not literally, right? It'll all be virtual. But to do the 5-week online equity rubric training for folks here. And so look for an announcement about that. Second, I think you all said that you would make your slides available. Is that correct?
We will.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so thank you. I will follow up on participants and let you folks know where those slides are going to be. I think the articles here at the end are particularly great, and that slide on the data was amazing, and it would be interesting to get that to ask Lisette Brasso Cruz to find that kind of data for our folks here. Yeah, that one. so there's a lot of really good stuff in the slides. So thanks for your willingness to share those. And just thanks for coming back and giving us some hands-on experience with the online equity rubric. I think a lot of the equity rubric is happens in the classroom, right?
Well, and I think Maria made a really good point early on that this is an iterative process. I mean, I've been working with the Peralta team for 3 years now, and I'm still finding ways to apply different criteria to my own course. And so it's not something that you do overnight. The +1 mentality of what can I do this week or this semester? What strategies can I adopt? And then just keep going from there. And hopefully with this workshop and the ones that happen for other groups, the career and technical education group, the STEM group, you know, it's exciting that we'll start to see these equity-based conversations at Woodland.
Yeah. And I mentioned at the end of Lasana Hotaps, but just for those of you still tuning in right now, Kevin Kelly has approached Liseth, our Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, about starting a research project to see how we can institutionalize the equity rubric. And I'm very much looking forward to continuing those conversations and figuring out what that looks like. So thank you.
That's so exciting. Yeah, I'm really stoked to learn more about like student needs at your college and meeting more faculty, working with faculty from different areas and similar areas. I've learned a lot. So really thankful for this opportunity.
Well, I'm new here, so when I say this, you can be assured it is not at all self-serving. This is an amazing faculty, and I think they're going to do great work with this stuff. So, but like I said, it's not self-serving. It's no reflection on me. I just got here. I'm just lucky. So,
That's
all
awesome.
right. Well, thanks everybody. And next up is Stephanie Curry. And there are a few concurrent sessions at 3 o'clock. So at 3 o'clock, Stephanie Curry will be meeting with some of the Guided Pathways groups. But there's also, Casey is going to be leading sort of a sharing session again, and I should have everything memorized and I don't. And I think if you haven't done your sexual harassment prevention training, I think that might be up there somewhere as well. But that's just a video recording. So, okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.